My husband had been buried less than 3 hours when his children locked me out of the house we had shared for 13 years. I was still wearing my dress uniform beneath a black morning coat when I entered the gate code. The keypad flashed red. I tried again. Nothing. Then Grant stepped onto the front porch with a new set of keys hanging from one finger. Melissa stood beside him, directing 2 hired men as they carried boxes through the front door. Owen was inside the hallway, crouched beneath the security cabinet with a screwdriver in his hand. "There is nothing left for you here," Grant said. Behind him, I could see Richard's watches laid across the dining table. Melissa had placed his insurance files, jewelry, and bank records into separate boxes. Owen pulled the camera hard drive free and dropped it into a padded case. Grant pointed toward 2 suitcases outside the gate. "My clothes. My service records. A framed photograph of Richard and me from my promotion ceremony. We are his children," Melissa said. "Everything in that house belongs to us." I looked past them. A blue file rested beneath Grant's arm. The label read, "Employee Restitution Agreements." He did not know what he was holding. I did. I took out my phone and began recording. The new locks. The truck parked in the driveway. The license plate. The boxes being removed. Owen carrying the hard drive. Grant's hand around the blue file. "You should call the police," Melissa said with a smile. "Tell them your husband's children took back their own property." I did not call. I lowered the phone and looked at all 3 of them. "Keep it," Grant laughed. Melissa turned away as though I had surrendered. Owen avoided my eyes. I walked back to my vehicle and called Richard's attorney. Samuel Brooks answered on the first ring. "They changed the locks," I said, "and they took the blue file." The line went silent. Then Samuel spoke. "Do not stop them." I spent that night in temporary officer housing near the base. I did not post about the funeral. I did not call Richard's relatives. And I did not answer the messages Melissa sent telling me when I could collect the rest of my belongings. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Grant had emailed every employee at Whitmore Freight. He signed the message, "Acting President and Chief Executive Officer." He told the staff that Richard's children were assuming control of the family company and that all future decisions required his approval. Melissa contacted the bank and the insurance company. Owen rented a truck and moved financial records, computers, and storage boxes from the house to a warehouse Grant controlled. Then the 3 of them began dividing what they believed Richard had left behind. Grant claimed Whitmore Freight and the main distribution center. Melissa chose the house, the jewelry, and the investment accounts. Owen took the restored vehicles, electronic equipment, and every file he believed might contain passwords or ownership records. Samuel sent them a formal notice. It stated that no property could be moved, sold, or transferred before the trust documents were reviewed. Grant replied within 20 minutes. "Nora told us to keep everything." Samuel wrote back that a spoken sentence at a locked gate did not transfer a house, corporate shares, trust property, or employee records. If they intended to claim possession, he said, they needed to produce a complete inventory for the court. They were too confident to recognize the danger. Grant listed every business file he had taken. Melissa listed the jewelry, insurance documents, and property records. Owen signed a statement admitting that he had removed the camera hard drive to protect family evidence. Each item included the person holding it, the time it had been removed, and its new location. All 3 signed the final page. They believed the inventory proved control. Samuel showed it to me that afternoon. His finger stopped beside 2 entries, the employee benefit records, and the old restitution ledger. Neither belonged to Richard's personal estate. They belonged to the company and the trust. The children had not merely taken their father's belongings, they had signed a sworn list confirming that they had seized property they did not own. Richard's children liked to say I had married into Whitmore Freight after the hard work was already done. That was not what the records showed. When I met Richard, the company had strong contracts but almost no internal control. Fuel invoices were approved without matching vehicle logs. Warehouse counts changed from one week to the next. Payments moved between accounts without explanations. 2 years after we married, the problems became serious. A supplier stopped deliveries because Whitmore Freight had missed several payments. The bank threatened to suspend the company's credit line. Without that money, Richard could not fuel the trucks, cover payroll, or keep the main distribution center open. Then I found the patterns. Fuel had been purchased for vehicles that had not moved. Invoices had been created for shipments that never existed. Money had left the employee benefit account, and company property had been pledged against a loan Richard had never approved. I used my military savings to cover 2 payroll cycles. I also transferred part of my investment account to keep the warehouse from being seized. Richard recorded every dollar as a formal capital contribution. There were board minutes, bank records, tax documents, and a revised ownership schedule. I never asked him to put my name on the company sign. I did not need public credit. Grant, Melissa, and Owen used that silence to rewrite what happened. They told relatives I had merely helped Richard organize a few files. The financial records showed that my contribution exceeded everything the three of them had ever invested combined. Samuel opened the trust documents. The house was held by the trust. The controlling interest in Whitmore Freight was also held by the trust. I was named successor trustee. The children were entitled only to fixed distributions if they followed Richard's conditions. My words at the gate had changed none of that. You cannot surrender real estate, corporate ownership, or trust property by saying keep it, Samuel said. Then he pointed to one sentence Richard had written into the trust. He had not described me as a secondary beneficiary. He called me the person who preserved the company when my children endangered it. Samuel closed the file. The final box was not prepared when Richard became ill, he said. He sealed it 7 years ago. 7 years earlier. The first time his children had tried to take from the company. The first warning came from the bank. Richard received a notice about a business loan he had never approved. The loan had been secured against company vehicles and part of the main warehouse. The authorization carried his name. The signature was not his. When the company accountant reviewed the records, the fraud divided into 3 separate paths. Grant had used Whitmore Freight assets to support a private real estate project. Melissa had moved money out of the employee benefit account and into a temporary holding company. Owen had altered warehouse records to hide shipments that had never taken place. Richard had enough evidence to involve law enforcement. Instead, he called me into his office. His parents were still alive. His father was in poor health. Richard believed a public prosecution would destroy them. I told him forgiveness did not require leaving the company unprotected. So we secured payroll first. We froze unauthorized access. We restored the employee fund. Then each child was required to retain an independent attorney. The settlement agreement listed every unauthorized payment. Grant, Melissa, and Owen acknowledged the amounts they had taken. They agreed to a repayment schedule. They surrendered all direct management authority. They accepted that any unpaid advances would be deducted from their future inheritances. They were also forbidden from removing records, accessing company systems, or claiming control without the trustees' written approval. Each of them signed. Each attorney confirmed the terms had been explained. Each signature was notarized. Richard chose not to make the scandal public, but he refused to depend on another promise. He amended the trust. If any child seized property, removed surveillance equipment, concealed records, or claimed control before the trust was formally administered, that child would lose the remaining distribution. The forfeited money would not return to me. It would go into the retirement fund for the employees whose savings they had once endangered. Richard placed the original agreements, access logs, bank records, and trust amendment inside a sealed box at Samuel's office. The copies left at home were working files. Grant had taken one of those copies from beneath Richard's desk. He believed it gave him leverage. In reality, it proved he had already been warned. There was one final provision in the old agreement. Any property taken without authorization had to be identified in writing before it could be recovered. 7 years later, Richard's children had done exactly that. They had listed every item. They had recorded where each one was taken. And all 3 had signed their names beneath the inventory. For several seconds, I had wanted to call the police from outside that gate. Grant had changed the locks. Melissa was removing documents. Owen was taking apart the security system. But Samuel warned me what would happen if officers arrived before the trust had been reviewed. Grant would say he was protecting his father's business. Melissa would claim she was securing valuable property. Owen would insist the camera drive had been removed for safekeeping. And all 3 would say they did not know I had legal authority. The police might record the dispute and tell us to resolve it in probate court. Then Richard's children would return everything, rewrite their story, and deny that they had ever intended to seize control. I did not need to prove that they had touched the property. I needed to prove what they believed they were entitled to take. So, I documented everything. Who hired the locksmith? Who rented the truck? Who contacted the bank? Who ordered employees to accept new leadership? Who removed the records? And who claimed each asset as personal inheritance? Samuel sent them formal notice that the house, company records, employee files, and warehouse assets were controlled by the trust. They received that warning. Then they continued. Grant replied that he did not recognize my authority. Melissa signed the inventory after receiving the notice. Owen confirmed in writing that he had removed the local camera drive. He believed that meant no footage remained. He did not know Richard had moved the security system to encrypted cloud storage months earlier. The video showed Owen opening the cabinet, removing the drive, looking directly toward the camera, then carrying the evidence away. My words at the gate had not transferred anything. Keep it had given them no legal ownership. It had only kept them from changing their behavior before the record was complete. 3 days later, Samuel scheduled the trust meeting. He ordered them to return every asset they had taken. Grant refused. "Open whatever box you have," he wrote. It will not change who his real family was. Samuel read the message twice. Then he looked at me. "After that warning," he said, "they cannot claim this was a misunderstanding." Grant did not wait for Samuel to open the final box. He filed a petition to freeze the trust. Melissa claimed Richard had been manipulated during his illness. Owen said he had never been told the camera drive belonged to the company. Their attorney submitted photographs of Richard in a hospital bed. His face looked thin. His hands rested weakly above the blanket. Without dates, the photographs made him appear incapable of understanding anything. They accused me of isolating him from his children. They said my military training had allowed me to control the finances, the company records, and every person with access to Richard. They asked the court to stop me from changing management, to freeze the estate accounts, to prevent the trust from distributing any property, and to investigate whether Richard had understood the documents he signed. Samuel answered with a timeline. The trust amendment had been created 7 years before Richard's final illness. His physician confirmed that he had been healthy and mentally capable at that time. The notary remembered him reading every page. Each child had retained a separate attorney before signing the restitution agreement. Those attorneys confirmed that Grant, Melissa, and Owen understood the repayment terms, the access restrictions, and the forfeiture clause. Their tax records showed that they had reported the earlier payments as advances against inheritance and settlement proceeds. The cloud footage showed them taking property after Samuel's written warning. I did not call them thieves. I did not argue that Richard had stopped loving them. I asked only that every date, signature, and ownership record be examined. Then Grant produced what he called Richard's final will. The document gave the company and the house to all 3 children. For one moment, Melissa smiled. Samuel studied the pages. Then he noticed the vehicle identification number used to identify one of Richard's classic cars. Richard had sold that car 8 years earlier. The wording came from an outdated estate template stored in the blue file Grant had removed from the house. Samuel checked the document metadata. The alleged will had been created after Richard's death. He looked across the table. This was not found among Richard's records, he said. It was built from records taken after the funeral. Only someone who had entered the house and removed the old files could have created it. 3 days after Richard's children locked me outside my own gate, we met in Samuel's conference room. Grant sat at the head of the table as though the position already belonged to him. Melissa placed the inventory beside her attorney. Owen kept looking toward the door. They had not returned the house keys. They had not returned the camera drive, and they had not brought back the blue file. Grant looked at the sealed box near Samuel's chair. "Open it," he said. "Let us finish this." He believed it contained cash, perhaps stock certificates, perhaps another will he could challenge. Samuel cut the seal. The first document was the original living trust. The second was the 7-year-old restitution agreement signed by all 3 children. Then came the independent legal advice forms, the notary records, the repayment schedules, the employee fund statements, and the trust amendment containing the forfeiture clause. Samuel placed their new inventory beside the old agreement. The signatures matched. So did the prohibited actions. Grant had claimed control of Whitmore Freight. Melissa had taken insurance and property records. Owen had removed surveillance equipment. All 3 had moved assets after receiving written notice that the trust controlled them. Samuel displayed the cloud footage. The screen showed Grant changing the locks, Melissa directing workers toward the document cabinets, Owen removing the camera drive. Then came the signed inventory. Each child had identified what they took, when they took it, and where they stored it. Grant leaned forward. "We took our father's property." Samuel opened the ownership schedule. "The house belongs to the trust." He turned another page. "The company files belong to Whitmore Freight." Another. "The employee benefit records belong to the employee plan." Most of what they had seized had never belonged to Richard personally. Their actions triggered the forfeiture clause. Their remaining distributions would be transferred into the employee's retirement fund. The false will was referred for forensic review. The metadata showed it had been created after Richard's death from an outdated template found in the blue file. Every asset had to be returned. Grant stared at me. "You let us take everything." I held his gaze. "No, I let you show everyone what you were willing to take." Samuel reached into the box once more. He removed 3 sealed envelopes. One bore Grant's name, one Melissa's, one Owen's. Richard had written a letter to each of them. Owen opened his first. He read less than a page before his hands began to shake. Richard had not asked why his children wanted money. He had asked why, after being forgiven once, they had chosen to do the same thing to me. Grant lost his claim to Whitmore Freight and the distribution Richard had reserved for him. Without access to the company or the warehouse, his real estate project collapsed under its own debt. Melissa returned the jewelry, the insurance files, and every property document she had removed. Her emails to the bank became part of the court record. The relatives she had tried to impress finally saw how quickly she had divided her father's life. Owen cooperated. He returned the camera drive, identified where the files had been taken, and admitted that Grant had asked him to erase the local footage. He still lost his inheritance because he had signed the inventory and participated, but his cooperation prevented the matter from becoming worse. The court ordered the return of the assets and required the children to cover a substantial portion of the legal expenses. The forfeited distributions went into the retirement fund Richard had created for the employees they had endangered 7 years earlier. I did not ask for punishment beyond the evidence. I did not withdraw the records either. I did not pay Grant's debts. I did not help Melissa preserve her image. And I did not rewrite the trust to rescue Owen from a choice he had made willingly. Whitmore Freight kept its existing managers. I hired an independent operations director rather than trying to command the company from my military office. The employees received stronger protections over their retirement accounts. Then I returned to duty. Several weeks later, I drove back to the house. The locks had been restored under my authority. The boxes were no longer piled near the gate. Richard's watch was back in its drawer. The company records were secured. I placed the final box inside a new safe, not as a weapon, as proof that Richard had understood exactly what might happen when he was no longer there to stand between me and his children. That morning, sunlight crossed the front room and reached the table where Richard used to sit. I placed the new keys beside his chair. No one was waiting outside to tell me I did not belong. Grant, Melissa, and Owen believed Richard's death had left everything unguarded. What they never understood was that the last thing he left behind was not money. It was a record of exactly who they became when they believed no one could stop them.